Hi everybody, welcome. We are now all the way up to session 5. And what we're going to talk about today are the other 4 barriers to customer service. Last time we talked about 4, this is the final 4. We're going to be talking about body language, attitude, not using your brain, and making assumptions. So let's start. Body language. I have been busted so many times, and it's funny because when I teach an in-person session, I'll say, how many of you have ever been busted? Seriously, like 1 or 2 people raise their hands. So you know they are absolute compulsive liars. Come on. We all have been busted for this, that we think we have this really interested face and we get busted for rolling our eyes or making faces or doing something. So let's talk about the importance of that. Joe Navarro is a nonverbal communication expert and a coach, and he wrote this book called Louder Than Words. And I think it was absolutely fascinating. It talks about the hidden power of nonverbal intelligence. And this is his definition. So nonverbal is anything that communicates a thought, idea, mood, an intention, or a message, but is not a word. So when we're talking about nonverbal message, think about all the things we do all day. We can look at this couple at the bottom and know that the guy is not happy, that these people are happy, that this girl is flirting. In our culture, this sign is something that's very positive. This woman is upset, and none of these people are saying anything. Cross fingers, wink. Now, I'm sorry, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the nonverbals of our ex-president were very, very obvious. And I'm kind of surprised that no one sat down and said you need to be careful. All of these things convey messages without saying a word. Now, there was an interesting study done, and what they did is they had 2 women who worked at a library who'd been there a very long time. And they asked one of them to not show any positives. They wanted no positive nonverbals. You get the books, you ring them up, you scan them, the people are out of the way. The other person, they wanted her to do 3 things. They wanted her to make eye contact, they wanted her to smile, and use the patron's name from the library card. Now, when the patrons went outside, and by the way, it does not take any longer to do those 3 positive things. So when the patrons went outside, the surveyors didn't say how nice were they. They asked how competent they were. And the woman who was nice was better at her job. So it is not what you say, it's how you say it. And we've all been busted for not even saying anything. I didn't even say anything, but it doesn't matter. We are continually, as long as we're awake, we are continually sending nonverbal information. So this was one of the studies that was done by a gentleman at UCLA, and what he found in face-to-face communication, that 7% are the actual words, that 93% is nonverbal communication, including body language and tone of voice. And check this out. In telephone communication, it's still 82% tone of voice. And I don't know about you, but I can tell you that there's people who are very close to me that I can tell within a few words when they answer the phone if they're in a good mood or not. And guess what? We can also tell that when we are calling a business. It's also important to understand that body language is highly cultural. And I want to tell you a story.
Some of you might remember the story of LeBron James when the Duchess of Cambridge and Prince William came over to visit, and they took a picture together. And LeBron, which many Americans do, I do it all the time, put his arm around the Duchess. And it was a huge controversy. And the English were in an uproar, saying there is protocol, you do not touch the royals. So what was seemingly a very sweet gesture turned a little bit ugly. And I'm not suggesting that you understand every single culture's appropriate nonverbal communication, but it is important to understand that it is very, very culturally appropriate or inappropriate, depending on where you live.
And here's the picture that I was talking about. To me, it looks totally innocent. So it's interesting how this could create such an uproar. You want to make sure your nonverbal message supports your verbal message. If someone is bothering you in a social situation and you're uncomfortable and you go, don't, that's very different than making direct eye contact and saying, don't do that. Think about your 5-year-old is screaming and fighting with his sister, and you say to him, you apologize to your sister right now, and he screams, sorry! Guess what? He's saying the right words, but he has no interest in really apologizing. So let's look at the different components of nonverbal. Number one is eye contact. So, so important. And think about the eyes in general. Are they wide open, staring, cast down, steadily gazing at you, looking away, unblinking? Are they closed tightly, darting glances? All of those things is so important with eye contact. And even the eyebrows. Are they furrowed, raised up, down low? All of those things are important with eye contact. And again, this one is highly cultural. Think about the eye rolls alone, which is communicating so much. And if you call them on, I didn't even say anything, but yet you spoke volumes. If you're going to make friends, Larry, you must learn there's a fine line between eye contact and the piercing stare of a psychopath. They say in general we should look at people, occasionally look away, and look back, not the unblinking stare of a psychopath. This is just cute. That's why I included it. So the next is body posture, and look at the difference between these two people, the level of confidence. You want to walk with your shoulders back and standing up straight. Here's a picture that I found, and I thought it was very interesting. They're trying to talk this gentleman to going with them to the hospital. And look at the difference in the posture. This woman is leaning down at his level, making eye contact, and the other two are standing up with their arms crossed. Very different messages. Facial expressions. I think we've all been busted for this. I am really, really bad that if I don't like the taste of something, I cannot fake that it's delicious. So if someone's asking me to try something that I think I won't like, I'll say, you know, let me just have a little bit, and I'll try it later, because I know that I cannot take a bite of something nasty and say it's delicious. So interestingly, our different facial expressions are either voluntary, which is often socially conditioned, or involuntary, which is absolutely innate. So oftentimes we really don't realize what's going on with our face. Smiling, a smile actually originates in your eyes, not on your mouth. And look at the difference between these two guys. And I've met so many people that I could cover up their entire nose and mouth and still tell they're smiling. And they're so fortunate because their face just radiates. Interestingly, a number of years ago, Cathay Pacific flight attendants were going to go on strike, and they were still going to fly, but their strike was, we are not going to smile. Look at the power of a smile, that the Cathay Pacific powers that be decided we better negotiate because we do not want them on the plane and not smiling. The power of a smile. The shortest distance between two people is a smile. And if you're not a smiling type of person, this is not good for customer service. So the next one is gestures, and you've probably all received sometime in your life, maybe more than once, a gesture on the freeway that might suggest that the other drivers don't really appreciate your skills. Gestures are really, really important, and there's some people who continually talk with gestures. I used to work with a gal who was off the boat Italian, and she used to throw her arms around, and I said, you need to stop it. I'm afraid you're going to poke my eye out. She goes, I couldn't talk if I couldn't use my hands. So think about all the gestures that we use. The pointing finger. We know what this means. We know that that gesture means give me a call. We know that this gesture is, oops, sorry, yeah, I forgot. We know what this gesture means. You could probably, I bet you ask most 3-year-olds and they know what that gesture means. We know what this means. Interestingly, oftentimes when a physician will go into a room, they chart the time And so they'll look at their watch. And I suggest chart the time outside, because you walk into the room and you immediately look at your watch. It gets me a little anxious. I think you're in a big hurry. Here's another gesture. And some of you are too young to know what that is, but live long and prosper. This guy, obviously, on a first date, is a body language expert because he is reading what this woman says loud and clear. The next one is voice. And there's a lot of different aspects of voice. And tone is the vocal quality that really reveals how you're feeling in general and how you feel about the other person that you're talking with. And tone expresses emotion. The next one is inflection, and that's the way the words and syllables are emphasized, and it conveys different meaning. If you add emphasis on certain words, it really stresses their importance. The next one is pitch, and pitch refers to how loud or deep the voice is, and low-pitched voices are generally more calming than high-pitched voices. So being able to control vocal pitch is very important, and it's very helpful in particular when you're trying to diffuse an angry caller. Rate is the speed of speech, and a golden rule is to speak at the rate that's comfortable for the caller, and the easiest way to do that, either in person or on the phone, is to mirror their rate of speech. So to speed up or slow down and tailor delivery to each person individually. Another part of this is pacing, and again, keeping a similar pace with your listener. Volume is obvious. It's kind of how loud or how soft your voice is, and moderate volume is a great place to start. You want to vary the volume for the situation. And most people, if they don't hear you, will ask you to speak up. And generally people feel that if you speak softly, it is a lack of confidence.
My mom is in her mid-80s, and one of the things that is crazy and annoying is oftentimes when she goes into a retail store or a restaurant that someone sees her age and immediately starts talking really loud and really slow. Do not assume because someone is older that they can't hear. Another thing that makes me crazy is when an employee sees someone and guesses that English is not their first language, so they do the same thing. They speak really loud and really slow. And guess what? If someone does not speak English, they are not going to understand it really loud and really slow. That's incredibly condescending.
The next one is proxemics, and proxemics is personal space. And this is also highly cultural. And they say there's actually 4 zones within American culture. So we have intimate, which is touching to about 18 inches. Then we have personal, which is about 18 inches to 4 feet. We have social, which is about 4 to 12 feet. And then we have public, which is beyond that. And it's so interesting because, again, this is highly cultural. And I've had people from different cultures who are absolutely in my personal space, and it's really hard for me to focus on what they're saying because I'm simply thinking, okay, don't freak out, you can handle this. It's also a way to show intimidation. So there's people who are from the United States, born and raised, who will get in your personal space to show hierarchy. I always suggest for anybody who is going to take blood pressure, someone who's going to get in someone's personal space, to give the person a heads up. You know, I'm coming in, I'm going to touch you, I'm going to get in your personal space, I'm going to take your blood pressure. The next one is touch. And I am a huge hugger.
So let's talk about hugs for a moment. I'm a total hugger, and some of you are not. And it is very uncomfortable for me as a hugger to go in for a hug and have you absolutely uncomfortable. I generally ask before I give a hug if someone feels comfortable. And again, understand, sometimes it's just a first quick thing. I see someone upset, I immediately give them a hug. But there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable with that. Just another example of nonverbal communication.
So here's an interesting study. This was done on touch. in a non-intimate lunch setting. And they did this around the world, and what they found is two people at lunch in Puerto Rico touched on the average 180 times. In Paris, 110, in Florida, 2, in London, 0. So look at how issues can happen if you have someone from Puerto Rico and someone from London having lunch in the United States. Very, very different. And to me, I'm a toucher, and I don't even think about it. And it is something that we do need to be aware of. I also like this cartoon because I think it's so interesting. In our culture, men are generally not touchers with other men, but they will slap guys in sports on the butt. And women would never slap a girlfriend on the butt. So I think that's kind of interesting, and I wanted to share that. You can discuss it later. Again, with the handshakes, and I mentioned the importance of that. So the next thing is non-words, and non-words is also a very interesting part of communication. We have a few different things, and one of them is simply using filler words. And when you use these words, it distracts the receiver's attention away from their message, and your message, and they start to wonder if you really know what you're talking about. And this is so unconscious. I was working with a physician years ago, and he did a presentation, and I was giving him feedback, and it was awesome. He was so good. And I told him that, and I said, one of the things you need to be aware of is the number of ums that you use. And I counted well over 100 in his presentation. And again, it reduced credibility. And no one plans on it. Just be aware if you do it. The best thing you could do, I used to teach a public speaking class, and I would record people, and oftentimes they were stunned when they used filler words. Dramatic sighs is another non-word that people will use as part of body language. Annoying habits. Again, this will distract from your message. If you are talking to me and you're clicking your pen the entire time, I will not listen to it. I will just be thinking, oh my God, I want to grab that pen from the person now. Drumming your fingers on the desk signifies impatience. So one of my very favorite annoying habits stories was told to me when I was doing some consulting in a police station.
Okay, I have a great story for you. I was working in a police department, and they told me this amazing story about nonverbal communication. There was a police officer that worked there that would drink a cup of coffee every morning, and when he was done with his coffee, he would eat the entire styrofoam cup. I am not kidding. So I didn't believe them. During a break, I went up to the police chief and I told him this crazy story I was told, and he said, yeah, he did that. I said, are you kidding? Don't you have to pass a psychological? He said, yes, but apparently he did. So the police chief also added he usually had little pieces, little bits of styrofoam in the sides of his mouth. Are you kidding me? That is a crazy example of how nonverbal communication and someone doing something like that will absolutely stop listening. And if I figured if I'm ever unprepared for a talk, all I have to do is eat a styrofoam cup and no one will care what I'm saying because they will focus on that bizarre act.
Another part of nonverbal communication is what you're wearing, your style of dress and your physical appearance. And to me, I think these are super cute shoes. It looks like a great outfit, but this would not be appropriate for all business settings. So you need to really dress appropriately for your industry. Again, with the tattoos and the piercing, this says a lot about the person. Obviously, this guy is not going to get a job in a conservative industry such as banking. This was an interesting study, and what they found is the most common turnoffs with people nonverbally is not making eye contact, lack of smile, fidgeting, handshake, all of these things. I had a gal in one of my college classes who would twirl her hair, and she would do it at the speed of light. I am not kidding. I was absolutely fascinated how she could spin her hair so fast. And then I'd realize, uh-oh, I'm supposed to be critiquing what she's saying, and all I'm noticing is how fast she's spinning her hair. So here's a few tips on gaining nonverbal confidence, which I would think would be something we would all aspire to. When you speak to others, look directly into their eyes for at least 2 or 3 seconds before looking away. Merely glancing at each person very quickly kind of conveys insecurity or anxiety. Confident handshake again, palm to palm. Effective gestures. Using gestures to punctuate your words is very natural and hopefully spontaneous. Clothing speaks volumes in the workplace, again, dependent on your corporate culture. Taking up space. It's very interesting how men and women take up space. And what research shows is a female leg stance in North America is about 4 to 6 inches apart, and a male power stance starts at more than 8 inches apart. Men take up more space when they're sitting and they're standing. It's called man spreading. Another one is facial expressions. Be aware of what your face is revealing to observers. If you want to convey enthusiasm and energy, your face needs to be animated. Initiating interactions is about being assertive. If you want to convey energy and enthusiasm, again, initiating interactions, going up to the person, shaking their hand, introducing yourself. Appropriate voice tone. This is another one that's very important that we discussed. Paralanguage is actually separate than the actual words that you use. It's the nonverbal elements of your voice, including the tone, the pacing, the volume, the inflection. Giving the person your full attention. Do not look at your phone. Do not look at other people. Don't look away from them. Lean your body into the conversation. Focus your eyes, ear, and energy on them. And responding to the other's nonverbal cues. I was actually at a training a number of years ago with a salesman, and he said you should mimic. And I know that a lot of people say that, and maybe we do unconsciously, but I would be a little bit creeped out if the person I was talking to mimicked everything I did once I figured it out. The next one is attitude, and for me, this is one of the most important things I teach. It is absolutely tied with every element of life, including being happy. And there's a huge connection with customer service and attitude. And like listening, attitude is your choice. And what research shows is most people get fired not for lack of technical or clinical skills, but lack of interpersonal skills. You're just not nice. There's a lot of definitions about attitude, and this is one in particular that I like. It's the way you mentally look at the world around you. It's how you view your environment and your future, and the focus you develop towards life itself. So let's look a little bit about attitude in the workplace. I wish this was a real sign. Wouldn't this be awesome if it was at your workplace? Because there's some employees and there's some customers that would look at it and go, ooh, can't go in today. What they say is every workplace has a work attitude bell curve. And there's about 15% of people who are negative and 15% positive. And 70% are in the neutral zone. And if you have an extremely charismatic, vocal, negative person, they can pull all those neutral people over to the dark side. So we really need to cultivate and really recognize the positive people. I blocked out the word on the tie, and some of you will not know what that means, but I love this cartoon for 2 reasons. One is it makes me laugh that the boss is saying, you know, I'm not sure the word around the office is. Are you kidding me? It astounds me when I talk to a manager and they go, really? It's like, what? You didn't notice? And the other thing I love is I wish it was a real tie, because then it would give me a heads up when you're wearing it that perhaps I will not engage you in conversation that day. So one of the things you can do is don't give power to the toxic negative people. This is something that we do all the time, and we allow them to ruin our day, and don't do that. Another tip is smile. And you know what's interesting? Research shows that even a forced smile will make you feel happier. So bottom line is a positive attitude just makes life better. The next one is not using your brain. And This amuses me continually, and I'm just going to talk about this for a minute because it's pretty obvious. This one I absolutely loved. I know. And think before you speak. I was calling into an organization, and I asked for a gal who worked there, whose name is Pat, and I stated her last name. And the gal who answered the phone said, we don't have someone here by that name. And I said, really? She's been there forever. I doubt she retired. And she goes, no, she's not here. She said, could it be a different first name? And I said, why? And she goes, well, we do have someone with that last name. And I go, well, what's their first name? And I am not kidding you. She said, Patricia. And I said, you know what? Let's just go out on a limb and be a little wild and connect me to her. Use your brain. So the last one is about making assumptions. And this is a very interesting part of customer service. And it can be very dangerous, but it's also very important to live our lives that we do make assumptions. So let me give you an example. So my brother-in-law, Rick, and my sister and their kids for a while lived on a rural farm in Washington. And one day when their son Alec was 4, Rick was outside working on the pipes, and his son was outside playing, and one of their mules kicked Alec in the head. So Rick rushes into the local emergency room, and when they walk in, the nurse looks at Rick, who'd been working on a broken muddy pipe and was filthy. She said, do you have insurance? Which is a fair enough question. And then she added, do you have a job? And Rick said, yeah, I actually work in environmental services. And she goes, oh, like a garbage man? Rick took a deep breath and said, no, like a chemical engineer for the Environmental Protection Agency. She made a total assumption based on how he was dressed, and she was very embarrassed. Now, obviously, which we're going to talk about in a second, we have to assume some things, because I don't call into a doctor's appointment before I leave my house and say, hey, is it still on? Or I don't call friends to say, hey, we're supposed to meet in dinner in 10 minutes. Have you canceled? We have to assume things to live our lives, but we also have to be careful. So assumptions are normal, and we base them on data culled from experiences. And it's also, we believe that something's true without proof or demonstration. So let's look at the danger of assumptions we make in business. We assume that our customers are loyal and will never leave us, and we know that is a dangerous assumption. We also can assume that our customers are faithful to the company name, but you know what? It could be just one employee that we really love. My bank changed companies. A bank bought them out. I stayed with them because of one woman who works there, and when she left, I switched banks. I was not loyal to the bank. I was loyal to her. Businesses assume that we're the only game in town. We're the only hospital, so what else are you going to do? And I love this picture. This is actually a Prada store, and it is completely in the middle of nowhere, which is bizarre and wonderful. Now, these people can assume they are the only game in town. But for most of you, that's a dangerous assumption. Businesses assume that the customers care if you're having a bad day. And guess what? We don't, sadly. We assume that, you know what, you've had a few bad experiences and we have some unhappy customers, but it won't hurt us. Yes, it will. You can actually go out of business. Remember when I talked about angry customer plus internet equals very big megaphone? So let's look at some of the dangers of making assumptions. When you make assumptions, it can lead to being judgmental. It can lead absolutely to major misunderstandings.
Okay, I have a great story about assumptions. This gal's in the airport. Her plane's leaving in about a half an hour. And she goes into the little store there and buys some cookies and a soda and a magazine and sits down. And there's a seat and empty seats on either side of her. So she's reading her magazine and drinking her soda, and she reaches over for her cookies, and a man sat down on the seat away from her purse and the bag of cookies. And she looks over and he is eating her bag of cookies. And she is stunned. She looks at him, he looks over her, smiles, continues eating the cookies. She reaches over in the bag, eats one, and he looks at her and smiles. He eats another one, and then he holds the bag over to her just to grab one, not to give her the whole bag. And she is amazed and furious. So they continue that. Finally, it's the last cookie, and he offers it to her like he's being a wonderful guy, and she cannot believe it. So her flight is called. She's furious. She gets on the plane. She sits down. She belts herself in, reaches down for her magazine, and there in her purse is her bag of cookies. She assumed he was eating her cookies. He was eating the ones he bought. Horrible.
It can lead to wasted time. It can lead to total frustration and can even lead to outright conflict. So we need to check out our assumptions. So how do we avoid making assumptions which we're going to be making all day, every day? We ask. It's as simple as that. Instead of looking at someone and assuming something, simply ask them. There's a great book called The Four Agreements that I highly recommend, and one of the four agreements is the danger of making assumptions. And what it talks about is to undo assumptions, just become more aware. It's very interesting when I ask my college students, when the light turns green, what do you do? And they said, go. What do you do? And I said, I wait and I look to see if anybody ran the red light. I assume that people are going to run the red light. I stay safe by watching. It's about being conscious. On that note, we are done with this session, and I will again talk to you soon. Take care.